Hola, Max acá. En esta ocasión voy a presentar una presentación, valga la redundancia, que di en 2022, en mi primera presentación en inglés, entonces le tengo cierto cariño. Em, Esta investigación, como le hice hace 2 años, es un producto que he mejorado, y he escrito más, he investigado, entonces espero que se publique pronto, pero como saben, toma mucho tiempo. Pero mientras tanto, quiero compartir esto en YouTube porque creo que es una buena forma de mostrar al mundo qué es lo que estaba haciendo. Eh, Ahora la presentación la voy a leer integralmente como la leí hace 2 años. Entonces es exactamente lo mismo. Pero las slides del PPT son nuevas porque quería una ayuda para visualizarla mejor. Así que espero que disfruten y cualquier cosa, espero su feedback y comentario. Well, I'm going to switch English because the presentation was in English. As I was saying before, this was my first presentation in this language, and I did it 2 years ago, back then in 2022. This was presented the first week that I arrived in Berlin. So I was a bit nervous, but everything went well. So yeah, now I'm going to start. Um, this presentation is entitled An Alternative Route of Chilean Neoliberalism, Pedro Ibáñez Ojeda and the Regional Meeting of the Montplegan Society in Viña del Mar, 1981. This was presented at the workshop Peripheral Liberalism, Market Economists and the Liberal Script Outside the West, 1970 and 2020. That took place in Berlin between the 6th and 7th, October 6th and 7th, 2022. Um, Thank you everybody for your time. This is my first presentation in English and I hope it is not the last one. I'm going to talk about neoliberalism in my country, Chile, and its connections with the Montpelegan Society at a global, regional, and local level throughout the regional meeting of this organization in 1981. The Chilean history of neoliberalism has usually been focused on the experience of a group of young economists trained at Chicago University who became influential during the Pinochet's dictatorship, 1973-1919. However, I see two adverse effects of that trend. First, the history of Chilean neoliberalism has been focused only on the capital city, Santiago, overshadowing regional experiences on the subject within the country. And second, other groups and initiatives have been sidelined regardless of their importance or transnational connections. In effect, the origin and development of neoliberalism in Chile has been portrayed only in the framework of the Chicago Boys, removing the potential for a methodological and thematical dynamism in exploring alternatives or forgotten routes. That is why I propose an alternative route of Chilean neoliberalism, which I'll call the coastal route. This alternative path was led by the businessman and politician Pedro Ibáñez Ojeda, mainly based in the coastal city of Viña del Mar, 200 kilometers from Santiago on the Pacific coast. This route stood out for its regional and global connections with the Montpelegan Society and the business community during the 70s and 80s. The importance of this route can be explained in 3 points. First, to begin with, this alternative created an educational initiatives from which it disseminated economic ideas. I'm mainly thinking about the Escuela de Negocios de Valparaíso of the Fundación Adolfo Ibáñez, later known as Adolfo Ibáñez University. Additionally, the route had total autonomy from the Chicago Boys. It should be remembered that while successful, the Chicago Boys trajectory was not the only initiative in Chile. The group of Viña del Mar was also working on the spreading of neoliberalism. The coastal route did not co-opt the government's policy-making ambition of the political economy, but was also able to train hundreds of young entrepreneurs. Finally, Pedro Ibáñez Ojeda participated in many networks and maintained contacts within the country and abroad over time, especially among the Montpellier society. Ibáñez was central figure of this society in Chile. His stature exceeded the one of the Chicago Boys in the 60s. I propose he used the reputation of the MPS prominent intellectuals to promote a liberal agenda in Chile. The latter occurred in a context of where Chile was isolated internationally due to the coup d'etat in 1973 and the subsequent human rights violations committed by the dictatorship. In this sense, in my opinion, Ibáñez Ojeda expanded the global non-state networks to legitimize, support, and consolidate the Chilean economic model using the benefits that the Montpellier society could provide. So, who was Pedro Ibáñez Ojeda? Ibáñez's trajectory can be synthesized in three aspects. First, between the 1960s and 90s, he was the head of an important Chilean business group. He was a member of different business associations in Chile and Latin America, and even he became president of them. So he was an important businessman. In addition, he was one of the leading figures of the political Chilean right wing during the 60s and 70s. He was a fierce opponent against the Salvador Allende's government between 1970 and 1973. After that, he and his friend Carlos Cáceres were members of the State Council, whose mission was to discuss and propose a new constitution during the military regime. Finally, Ibáñez stood out as being one of the few representatives of neoliberal ideas when liberalism was deeply criticized in the country, especially from intellectuals that supported, especially spreading ordoliberal ideas. Ibáñez's global networks were also considerable. He joined the Montpellier Society in 1969, and his correspondence shows a good relationship with influential members of this society over the years. Why did Ibáñez want to organize the Montpellier Society in Chile? I see some reasons to explain this endeavor. First, he supported the transformation implemented by the military junta and understood that Chile's isolation could undermine those efforts. I think that Ibáñez realized that the Montpellier Society was a large transnational organization with influence around the globe, so their members could help to spread a good word about the Chilean experience, especially regarding the Chilean economic experiment. And finally, I think Ibáñez wanted to present the Chilean experience as a case of defeat of socialism in an age of authoritarian, and the case of defeat of socialism and the success of an authoritarian transition to liberalism. It is important to remember that socialism by then was considered irreversible especially during the Cold War. Now, I'm not going to summarize the whole article that I wrote. Instead, I'm going to talk about the importance of this paper on three levels. The first level is the global one. When I studied the efforts of Pedro Ibáñez Ojeda to organize the general meeting of the MPS in Chile, I realized some things. First, most of the literature that analyzes the relationship between the MPS and Latin America study how MPS members influenced agendas and political transformation in the local sphere. In this view, most local actors are pawns in a global crusade, mainly led by prominent figures from the north such as Hayek, Friedman, or Buchanan. In this regard, this article examines how Chilean figures led by Ibáñez took advantage from the society, such as symbolic prestige, political influence, media coverage, etc. Chilean figures were not passive followers, and they were not mandated by the MPS. However, they had a local agenda of consolidations and political support for the authoritarian transition to liberalism. Second, this research shows concerted and transnational collaboration to finance the Montpellier Society in Chile. Although most of the budget was covered by the Chilean enterprise companies, it also received funding from the Montpellier Society. In particular, Cheikh Nishiyama, president of the organization at the time, offered to collect resources from Japan and to contribute to the meeting organized in Chile. Although this example needs further studies, it is an example of transnational, I believe it is an example of transnational solidarity that we should pay more attention in the future. And now at the regional level, I realized where most of the regional committee members who suggested the speakers, topics, and attendees in the meeting were personal friends, academic contacts of Ibáñez, and also business peers, as evidenced by the constant correspondence between Ibáñez and them during the 60s and 70s. For example, Paulo Aires, a fellow from Brazil, for example, was a business partner of Ibáñez Ojeda, and they worked together on integrating him to the Chilean industry, or at least giving him some advice. In addition, they exchanged papers and books. They also shared ideas on plans, thoughts, and even organized Latin American tours to attract some prominent figures such as Hayek. On the other hand, Manuel Ayau, from Guatemala, helped Ibáñez in inviting to certain intellectuals and providing certain advice, political and intellectual advice. The latter shows certain closeness of the group in the Latin American neoliberal project. I believe that proves or indicates certain Latin American community. At the local level, it is inevitable to talk about three things. The first one, the relationship between the Chicago Boys and the coastal route. The second one, the groups that financed this meeting, and finally, the relationship between the dictatorship and the regional meeting. Although the Chicago Boys constituted a different route of neoliberalism, they did not antagonize Ibáñez's efforts. Moreover, they worked with Ibáñez in the local committee and consultative organizations created by Ibáñez. They were allies. Thus, former ministers of Pinochet and mainly Chicago Boys such as Jorge Caguas, Pablo Barahona, Rolf Luders, or Hernán Cortés Douglas participated in it. Interestingly, although the Chicago Boys were well connected to the US universities and economists, their integration into the MPS was through Ibáñez. To sum up, although Ibáñez represented another route, they worked together, they collaborated, and they formed a local alliance. Now, who did finance the meeting? The short answer is that most benefited economic groups of the country reforms contributed to this initiative. Most of them had fostered other liberal initiatives at the time. For example, the Vial Group, VHC Bank, invited Friedman, Harberger, and Carlos Langoni, a future president of the Brazilian Central Bank between 1980 and 1983, to give different lectures and seminars in 1975. In 1980, four economic groups created the Centro de Estudios Públicos, financed the Center for Public Studies. And then also Ibáñez and the coastal route were able to gather support among the Chilean business people interested in spread liberal ideas. Ibáñez itself funded and created certain projects to spread liberal ideas in the country. What was the relationship between the Montpellier Society and the regime? As I mentioned, Ibáñez met Pinochet and his foreign minister before departing to Hong Kong in 1978 to propose hosting the next general meeting of this society. Pinochet was enthusiastic, actually, about the endeavor and offered help. Later in 1981, Ibáñez and local community wanted the presence of the government and governmental authorities in the meeting, something explicitly forbidden since the meeting held in Stanford in 1980. Although Ibáñez knew about that, he insisted Due to the latter, Nishiyama managed to arrange a solution with other NPS members. Governmental officials could give a word of welcome to participants. This could be done at the opening and closing banquet. Nishiyama took full responsibility for this decision. This exception was probably granted to the Chileans because the Andean country was believed to be on a transition to liberalism, although led by authoritarian measures. Rather than objecting to the military dictatorship, there was a considerable flexibility on behalf of the Chileans. To sum up, in introducing the notion of the coastal route of Chilean neoliberalism, this presentation seeks to broaden the understanding of this doctrine in Chile beyond the history of the Chicago Boys. I am criticizing, indeed, the Chicago-centric approach in my country. I am aware this talk maybe leaves more questions than answers. That is because what I'm doing is an explored territory. Besides that, I think the coastal route of Chilean neoliberalism opens interesting questions and opportunities for research, not only for Chileans, but also for Latin Americans and global historians. This is only a beginning. Well, this was a presentation. I hope you enjoyed. I did it 2 years ago, so now I have included the feedback that I got then and in other conferences. I hope to publish the article, but that takes time, as everybody knows. And I hope to see you. I hope you see me again in the next video. Bueno, eso fue todo. La presentación la di hace 2 años, entonces he incluido más cosas que me han dado en el feedback. Espero que el artículo se publique, pero por mientras tienen esta presentación, este video, y les puedo enviar el draft si es que les interesa. Espero que el video les haya interesado y sigan viendo. Cualquier cosa, espero por su contacto o sus comentarios o y estoy disponible para seguir conversando sobre esto. Así que tengan buen día.